Since I started telling people that I was writing a book, the biggest question I got or response I got was, wow, what made you decide to write a book? And really, I need to go back a couple of years in the story to explain why. So I've spent 20 years in financial services across consulting, regulators, banks, and I'd gone out on my own, set up Spark, and was working with corporate clients, doing large-scale transformation, innovation within those corporate clients. And increasingly I was getting exposed to more and more startups through that innovation work, through them coming in either for corporate investment or for sales to those corporates as well. And some of them were okay, quite a lot of them not so great. And then one day there was an event for 10 startups to pitch at this particular corporate. And over 60 people from that corporate came, sat in the room. There was a real buzz of excitement about the place, and everyone couldn't wait for the first startup to get up on stage. And then the first one stepped up and completely missed the mark. Really didn't understand who they were talking to. The quality of their pitch wasn't great, and you could see that it wasn't just what they were saying at the time, but the underlying structure of their company and how it addressed the needs of who they were talking to wasn't great either. And so we kind of wrote that off. First one, not great. And then the trend continued though. So by the time the sixth startup had got up on stage, only one had come anywhere near the standard that people were hoping for. And actually people started to walk out. So those poor startups that were the last ones were getting an increasingly smaller audience to speak to, and it was awful. Having that fantastic opportunity to speak to a company of that size and that number of people across a company of that size, and to mess it up at that point. And it really became clear to me then that startup founders often have extremely good knowledge and experience and skill set around the problem that they set out to solve, but it doesn't mean that they have great skill set around fundraising and pitching. So in my 20 years in corporate world, I'd spent a lot of time getting money out of corporate boards, at just over 20 million in fact. So I knew what it takes to convince people to give you money. So I started to put down what I thought were the kind of key principles that it would take for someone to invest in a company based on my experience. And then I set out to actually validate whether that approach was right. And I went out and talked to investors into startups who'd raised successfully, and also to experts throughout the startup ecosystem. So people like Luke Lang, who's the head of Crowdcube, or co-founder of Crowdcube, I should say. And happily, they were validating exactly the process that I'd outlined in my 6 steps, my key principles. So that became the Investor Ready roadmap that we use with our startup and scale-up clients now. And as I started working with those clients, and really refining what that process looked like, it became also clear to me that the best way to codify anything is to write it down. So turning all of those interviews and research and my principles into a book seemed like a really natural progression from what started out as just a frustration on my part, that startups were missing out on great opportunities to get funding. So now I'm happy to say that we work with startups and scale-ups from pre-seed up to Series A, raising from 50k up to 10 million, and helping them to really achieve their fundraising goals.